Hello and welcome to this video demonstration on how to deploy Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure. Now before we get started with the actual deployment, there's a few things that we need to note and be prepared for when we're actually deploying Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure. So when we want to understand the requirements for the deployment, the easiest way to do this is come to the Veeam Help Center. Now you do that by going to helpcenter.veeam.com. Browse for Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure and you see the page that we see now. So if we look here, we see that we have the planning and preparation section. And there's a few things that we need to understand before we go and deploy Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure. The first thing is, what ports do we need open on our network security groups? You'll see during the demonstration of the deployment how we actually go and create security groups in Microsoft Azure for things like the worker instances, but also making sure that we have the right port groups open to give access to the controller server and the workers so that they can talk to each other. We also see here that we have some details around the Azure service accounts. Now we provide an automatic way to create this service account, and it's very easy. Or you can come in and read through this and look at how to use an existing service account. We also have a section down here that talks about repository accounts. So for your storage accounts, and when we want to create the repositories, how are we going to do that? Now the easiest way is to have the Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure go and create all this automatically. But if you're in an environment where you need to create these manually, or you have specific processes for creating service accounts and storage accounts, then you can refer back to this guide to look at this. But for this deployment video, we're going to look at how we do this automatically. So once we have read through this guide and we understand the actual requirements for deploying Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure, we can then move on to actually deploying it through the Microsoft Azure Marketplace. So the way that we deploy Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure is through the Azure Marketplace. You simply log in to the Microsoft Azure portal, click the Marketplace icon, and then you're presented with a search the Marketplace search bar. You just search for Veeam, and you're presented with all the products that Veeam have in the Microsoft Azure Marketplace. So you can see we have the Veeam Service Provider Console, we have Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365, and we also have what we're looking for today, the Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure. We have two editions, the Bring Your Own License edition or the free edition. Now it's important to understand the differences between these two editions. The free edition is exactly as it says. You can deploy this free of charge. There's no cost or charges from Veeam, and you can protect up to 10 virtual machines completely free. If you want to protect more than 10 virtual machines, then you would deploy the Bring Your Own License edition. Now this is for a standalone product where you can purchase licenses, or it integrates with the existing Veeam Universal license if you're an existing Veeam customer and you're already using Veeam Backup and Replication. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to deploy the free edition, but the considerations and the concepts are exactly the same whether you're deploying the Bring Your Own License edition or the free edition. So we just pick the free edition, and we're presented with a page that gives us details about what we're actually deploying. So we can see that we reliably protect up to 10 Azure VMs for free, hence the free edition. So it's important to make sure that you deploy the right edition that you need. We click the Create button, And this will walk us through the deployment wizard within Microsoft Azure. So the first thing you'll notice is you get to pick your subscription. So if you have multiple subscriptions, you can deploy this into whichever one you have. For this demo, we only have one subscription. We then also have the ability to create and pick resource groups. So it's recommended to create a resource group for Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure. Now, if you've got pre-populated resource groups, you'll see these in the actual drop-downs, but you also have the ability to create a new one. So for this, we're going to create a new one, and we'll call this Veeam Backup Azure. And it validates that it's correct. And then we can go on to what we're actually going to call the appliance. So what are these instance details? So the first thing is a virtual machine name. So we'll call this VB Azure, and I tend to use the date of what we're doing this on, so I always know when I'm looking back, and it's April 30th, 2020. We pick our region that we want to deploy this in. So this isn't where you are running your workloads, it's just a region where you want the actual appliance to be located. So I'm going to say US Central. It automatically tells us what size it's going to create. So you can change this if you want, but it gives us a default size. We then move on to the password, and this is creating a username and password that we will use to log into this appliance through the HTML web interface later on. So I will give this a username of Veeam Product Strategy. I will enter a password. And then I move on throughout the different stages. If you want to change any of the disk settings, network management, any of those configuration options, you can here. But typically, you would just leave these as the defaults. The networking, this is where you pick your actual virtual networks that you want the appliance to be attached to within Microsoft Azure. Now, by default, it creates a new one based on your resource group name, creates a new subnet, gives it a new public IP, but you can go in and pick any existing ones that you have. So if you have any security groups and networks that you use specifically for outbound traffic, you can go and attach these. I'm going to pick the default. Then you come to the network security groups. So this is the firewall settings that restricts the incoming and outgoing connections. So I'm going to create a new one for this. And I'm going to leave it as the default names. What you'll see here is it's already populated with the firewall rules that we were looking at on that requirements page on the Veeam Help Center. We'll say OK. We move on to management. Again, you typically leave these as the default, but if you wanted to do any auto shutdown, so you would only have this appliance running during the time that you're actually running your backup windows, then you can do this auto shutdown and auto enable piece here. For this purpose, we're going to leave this off. We go through the advanced. Now we come to the tags. Now tags are very important when you're thinking about automation. Do we want to assign a tag to the instances and the virtual machines we're deploying in Microsoft Azure? So you could create something like a name of backup, and you could say a value of true. And then later on, when we look at configurations, we can use this for creating automated lifecycle policies. If you're not familiar with tags, I would recommend that you go review the Microsoft Azure documentation to learn how you can use tags more. And we will talk about this in a later demonstration when we're looking at configuration of Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure. So I'm going to delete this for now. Finally, we come to the review and create section. So hopefully this will pass its validation. and then we'll be able to click the Create button, and it will go off and deploy the actual appliance. We see that the validation's passed. We also get told how much this is going to cost us per hour for running this appliance. So fairly inexpensive. Once we're happy with everything that we've put in here, we know that the validation's passed, we simply click Create. This will now go away and deploy the Veeam backup for Microsoft Azure Virtual Appliance. See that while this is actually deploying, there's a number of steps and tasks being created within Microsoft Azure. So we see that we're creating some network interfaces, security groups, public IP addresses, and so on. Once this is completed, it will just let us know that it's complete, and we can move on and actually go and configure the Veeam backup for Microsoft Azure Appliance. Now we do that by going home, and we simply select the virtual machine that's just been deployed through that deployment wizard that we were running through. We pick that virtual machine, so we see here the one that we created with that date that I'm always so fond of. We select that virtual machine, we copy the public IP address of that virtual machine, and then we go and paste that into a new browser tab. That will then give us access to the HTML user interface that will allow us to go and configure the Veeam backup for Microsoft Azure Appliance. So we accept our certificates. We then log in with the username and password we created during that deployment wizard. So we'll log in with the Veeam Product Strategy user account. We then are presented with the end user software license agreement. So we will read all the details of this, decide whether we want to accept it, and then go and accept that EULA. That's it. You're now ready to begin configuring the Veeam backup for Microsoft Azure Appliance. We will go through in a separate video how you configure your Azure subscriptions and accounts, how you configure your repositories, and also the worker instances in the next video. Thank you for watching.